Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be going back to the college football playoff prediction. It's been quite a while since I've done it, but with less than a month away until conference championships start, no better time to do it than exactly right now. I've already filled out my bracket. I've already done it all. This is tough. It gets tougher and tougher every time, I feel like. I've recorded this video up to 3 or 4 times now, just haven't been able to post it, but I think now is the perfect time. So let's get straight into it. We're going to start with the first four buys, and then we'll go with the other 8 teams. So let's get straight into it with number one. At number one, it's been consistent for the last couple weeks, and that is going to be number one, Oregon. They stay at number one. They had a tough week against Wisconsin this last week. However, I think it's just a bump in the road. It happens. Everybody has one of those games that, it's not the greatest, and that happened to be this game for Oregon. They still get the win, though, 16-13 on the road. Dylan Gabriel did not have a good game. However, Jordan James for them, great game, 25 carries, 121 yards, and a touchdown. At this point, they have the number one spot on lock. The only teams that are going to be able to come and take them down is Ohio State, Indiana, or Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, unless Oregon fumbles the rest of the season, which their last game is against Washington, which they could. I mean, they're going to be coming off a bye, so I don't see that happening. But that's a game they could possibly drop. It's at home as well, so don't count the Ducks as a loss in that one. However, they are going to have a tough one in the Big Ten championship game. They're either going to get met with Ohio State, Penn State, or Indiana. I don't know exactly who's going to be there. Currently, it's Indiana, but of course, Ohio State, Indiana plays this upcoming week. So, following that game, you'll probably get to see who actually plays Oregon in the Big Ten championship. So, number one spot, still Oregon, and it probably will be for the rest of the season. Next up, we're going to the SEC, and this is going to be my SEC winner. I still think it's Texas, even though they haven't been playing the greatest football here lately, especially even last week, losing to Arkansas, or winning against Arkansas, my apologies, 20-10 in that one. They are still atop of the SEC with their overall record of 9-1. Their next opponent is Texas A&M, and if they win that game, then they will be a lock in the SEC championship game. And vice versa for the Aggies. If the Aggies win, they'll be in the SEC championship game, which is, I don't think, a team that people saw that happening. However, Texas A&M is going to be the team that shakes up the college football playoff the most, I think, because the way the SEC has been, you have Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and Ole Miss all currently fighting for a college football playoff spot, and Texas A&M quietly sneaking up in there. So Texas needs to get this win in order to kind of calm down that Texas A&M noise and kind of leave it as the wash, I guess you can say. Leaving Texas at my 2, so they'll have a first round bye and they'll play the 7-10 matchup. For my number 3, I wasn't really sure where I should go with this, but for number 3, man, it was a doozy. I think I'm still gonna go with the ACC representative, and that's gonna be Miami. I don't see anybody beating Miami. The only teams, of course, in the ACC championship conversation are Miami, SMU, and now Clemson, I think, is back in that mix. So those 3 teams, well, one of those 3 teams are going to be the ACC representative. I still think Miami's the best team out of the 3. I don't think anybody's going to stop them. And then, of course, they had a bye week this last week, and then they play Wake Forest and they play Syracuse, who not an easy task, but I still think a very doable task. Right now, SMU is currently in, and Miami just needs to win. But yeah, I don't see really anybody taking the throne from Miami as of right now, unless they lose another game, which could possibly happen. They could lose that ACC championship game and be out of it. But Cam Ward has been electric all season. I think the offense is so good. The question is the defensive side. I still trust the Hurricanes here. So Hurricanes at number 3. For my number 4 spot, this is where we get spicy. I was looking at how the rankings were, and I think this team could possibly be a top 4 seed, and that is going to be Boise State. Okay, listen, hear me out. Currently, they are ahead of BYU and Colorado. So that's the other conference that's going to make some noise here. And then they're also one spot behind Miami. And if Boise State continues on that trajectory, I think they could be a top 4 seed because it's the conference champion winners and you got to remember that. But I'm gonna have Boise State there. I think they win out the rest of the season and they become Mountain West champion, and nothing really stops them. They play Wyoming, who is not very good in the Mountain West this year, and then they play an okay Oregon State team. And after that, they'll play Colorado State, I believe, who is also a very, very good team. But I think they should win out the rest of the season. For my number 5 team, and again, I don't know if this is actually possible, and I'm gonna have the Ohio State Buckeyes as my number 5 team. I think they beat Indiana this upcoming week, and after that, they play Michigan, I believe. So that's their last 2 games of the regular season, and then they would go into the Big Ten championship game and have to play Oregon. In this scenario, they lose to Oregon. You look at it, Ohio State's 2 losses on the season would be to the number 1 team in the country, and I don't know how far they would actually fall. So I'm leaving them at the 5 regardless. They're going to be my number 5 team, and they'll host the 5-12 matchup. I think that their last 2 games are going to be really, really key, and they won't jump Oregon for the number 1 spot, even beating Indiana. But I think they will be darn close with votes. I think they might get a couple votes. Not again, not sure, but Ohio State's my 5. At number 6, I'm gonna go with Penn State again. I think after the loss to Ohio State, they don't lose any other games the rest of the season because their schedule consists of Minnesota and Maryland. Even though Minnesota has been up, kind of that upset team a couple times this season, of Maryland, not too. Never mind, they are 1-5 in the Big Ten. So yeah, they've been pretty bad. So as it goes currently, Penn State should be in the college football playoff, and I don't think they'll be in the Big Ten championship, so they'll miss out on that. But still think they get a really high seed this playoff time. So give them number 6. At my number 7 seed, it's gonna be Notre Dame. I think they're currently the 6th seed. And again, the way things go, teams will shuffle, things like that. And I don't think they can get that top 4 seed. I'd like to see the college football playoff give them that number 4 spot just because they've been good all season, but they don't win a conference, so that's the only issue. But regardless, they still get in unless they lose to Army, which might be a possibility because the Knights are at 18. I think they play this week to be exact. Yeah, they play this week. Look for that game. Ohio State versus Indiana, Notre Dame versus Army. 2 big ones coming up this week. Notre Dame will get in. I have them at my 7. At number 8, I was debating between 2 teams, and I think I'm going to stick with this one. And my team is going to be Alabama. I think Alabama, they've gotten a lot of hate this season, but I still think they get in. Don't think they lose a game the rest of the season, which is a huge, huge plus for them. I think they don't make the conference championship game as well. So that's why I have them ahead of some other SEC teams, which you'll see in a little bit. They have Oklahoma and Auburn to end their regular season. Still don't think they make that SEC championship, but they do get in the playoff, and I think they host a game. At number 9, I'm going to have Indiana dropping to 9 in the college football playoff. The loss against Ohio State, in my opinion, is going to be huge. I don't know if they would drop this far. Maybe they are the 8 and they switch with Alabama. Who knows? But currently, I have them at the 9 seed. They would only technically drop 4 spots in the college football playoff, but they would only have 1 loss on the season. Their resume has been okay. They really don't have any really, really tough wins. If they win against Ohio State, they go up against Oregon. I think they're top 6 seed and go where Penn State is here. Indiana, going to be my 9. They would go up against Alabama. That's going to be a fun one in Tuscaloosa. I mean, I saw a couple people dogging on the Hoosiers for they don't play in big games or like they don't play in big stadiums, and then they showed the graphic of playing at Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. Really funny joke there. But Indiana, good football team. I want to see them get in, and I think they will get in no matter what. At number 10, this is where I have a spot where Alabama could be switched, and that's going to be number 10, Georgia. I think Georgia makes the SEC championship, loses to Texas, and then Georgia would have 3 losses on the season. I don't know if the committee would allow a 3-loss team to get in, but I think since Georgia made the SEC championship game, they'd give them a little bit of slack. I think Georgia could be that 8 seed even. It just depends on how much love the committee gives them and how much people actually like Georgia. Carson Beck has not been great this season, and that's been a huge flaw. They are usually a pretty consistent quarterback play, and Carson Beck has not been it this season. So putting Georgia at 10, they would go up against Notre Dame, and that's going to be an interesting one. Coming in at number 11, this one again another really tough one. I debated between a couple of teams because you have Ole Miss, Tennessee, SMU, BYU, and even throw Colorado in that mix as well. Five teams kind of fighting for that last spot to get in if you're not a conference champion. However, I am going to give it to Ole Miss. I think their offense is really, really fun. Obviously, Jackson Dart, and I think they're starting to figure some things out. They beat Georgia last week, 28-10. They're not going to make that SEC championship game. However, I think they're still good enough to be in the playoff. Their last few games, Florida and Mississippi State. Florida could be a trap game there in Gainesville. Is it Gainesville? Regardless, I think Ole Miss still gets in. They win their last two games, and they're the final SEC representative. Last but not least, the number 12 seed in my college football bracket. I know we haven't seen a Big 12 team yet, so this is where they're going to come into play. I debated really hard. Everybody knows I've been BYU, 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 BYU. And after the loss last week and after some hard consideration, I am not going to pick them. I'm going to pick the Buffs of Colorado. I think they get in as the 12th seed. The reason I have them this low is because they would probably beat BYU in the Big 12 championship, and then Boise State is still ahead of them. So they would get that last remaining spot. So teams like SMU, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Clemson, Army, they'd all kind of miss out. But Colorado gets in. The Deion Sanders kind of experiment has worked really, really well. Maybe that's because of Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter, but I guess we'll see that next year when those two players go to the NFL draft. Colorado's going to be my last team. They would go into Columbus, play Ohio State, which that one would be a really fun one. So that is kind of the top 12 teams for you. Now let's break it down even further than that. We're going to start with the 5 versus 12 matchup, Ohio State versus Colorado. I think this would be a really fun game depending on which Colorado we get. We're going to get a Colorado that really plays from behind the whole game and has a difficult time kind of getting back in the game. Or we're going to get a game like Nebraska where they just could not get the offense going. It's going to be a tale of two tapes because Ohio State kind of in that same situation. We're going to get an Ohio State that played Penn State that couldn't get the offense really rolling. We're going to get a Ohio State versus Oregon who kind of shot themselves in the own foot, weren't able to get the scores when they needed to, and really Oregon should have won that game by a bigger margin. However, I'm going to give the nod to Ohio State. Tougher competition, tougher schedule, and I think Colorado, because they barely squeak in, is going to lose in the first round this year. We're going to move on to the 6 versus 11, Penn State versus Ole Miss. In Penn State, I have a problem with picking this game because I don't think Penn State's very good, and Ole Miss has been shaky this season. But I did pick Ole Miss to get the upset. I just think their offense might be a little too much for the Nittany Lion, and we saw Ohio State's offense was a little too much for Penn State, even though they're not as good as Ole Miss's offense. So give me the Rebels to move on. Our first technical upset in this college football bracket. I think Penn State is just going to struggle against the Ole Miss offense, and that's really what's going to do it. For my 7-10 matchup, Notre Dame versus Georgia. This one would be in South Bend, Indiana, and I think Georgia gets the upset here too because, again, Georgia might just be too much for Notre Dame, and depending on which Carson Beck we get from the Georgia Bulldogs, it will all really, really depend on who wins this game. And is Notre Dame really a good team? That is going to be the huge question because their last few games have been against some not great teams. Stanford, Georgia Tech, who's all right, Navy, who was ranked at the time, but we all kind of know that story there. Florida State, who they beat 52-3. Then they played Virginia, where they won 35-14. Their last two games are going to be some of the toughest of their season. Army, them and USC, their kind of toughest games. It really will come down to who is Carson Beck going to be. Is he going to be the interception throwing king that he is, or is he going to be the leader and consistent player that Georgia needs for the offense? Still going to pick Georgia. Last and final game in the first round, 8 versus 9, Alabama versus Indiana. I had a tough time picking this one, but in Tuscaloosa, so I'm going to give the nod to Alabama because at home they do tend to play a little bit better, and I don't know how good Indiana's actually going to be. You can say all you want if you're an Indiana fan, but their schedule has not been great. FIU, who's not a very good team, Western Illinois, if you're a South Dakota fan, you know about Western Illinois. They beat UCLA 42-13. UCLA not very good. They've been on the come up. Charlotte, Maryland, Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State, and Michigan. Their best win is Michigan on the season, which they beat 20-15 at home. They don't really have a win. Don't think they can get it done against Alabama. So Alabama moves on to play number 1 Oregon. Okay, so we'll keep it right there. Alabama versus Oregon again. I think Oregon is going to be that powerhouse team in this playoff, and it's a team that you do not want to see if you're Alabama trying to get back. This last game and then the Big Ten Championship are going to really show you what this Oregon team is. I think last week was a good test for them, but Washington at Oregon, I think they'll probably get the easy win there, and then they'll play Ohio State or Indiana or Penn State. I'm going to have Oregon beating Alabama, and they will move on to one of the final 4 teams. Going to Texas v. Georgia, it'll be the third time these two teams played, in my opinion. I think it'll go the way of the SEC championship game. So Texas will have 2 back-to-back wins on Georgia, and Texas will move on to the next round. I don't know how to feel about either of these teams because they're both like wishy-washy at the moment. And could Notre Dame upset both of these teams? Maybe. It all really depends on how good Notre Dame is. Miami versus Ole Miss, the 11 versus 3. Miami the 3, Ole Miss the 11. I don't know how either of these teams would play in this. Miami's offense, of course, has been the storyline all season. They can't crumble right now, but Ole Miss's offense also really, really good on the season. It's really going to come down to whose defense is better. If I had to pick a team, I'm a big Miami guy. However, I think Ole Miss will get the upset here over the Miami Hurricanes. I think they just have a little bit more star power. And at the end all be all, that's kind of what matters. They have a tough, easy schedule, if that makes any sense, because they would play Penn State and then they'd play Miami. I think those are 2 semi-decently easy teams. I don't know if many will agree with that, but give me Ole Miss to play Texas. Last team to get in, number 4 Boise State versus number 5 Ohio State. It's going to be a tough one, and I'm a big fan of both of these teams, really. Of course, I'm a Ohio State fan, and Boise State's been fun to watch all season, but I think I'm going to give it to the Buckeyes in this one. I think they beat Boise State. I just don't know if Boise State's going to have enough firepower, enough to stop Ohio State. Granted, can the Ohio State defense stop the Boise State run game? That's the real question. I guess we will see. I think Ohio State beats Boise State to move on to play Oregon in another rematch. We'll keep it here with Oregon, Ohio State. I debated a really, really long time picking this one. And I have a team written down, but I don't know if I really want to change it. You know what? Let's change it. We're going to change it. I think Oregon does beat Ohio State. I had Ohio State beating Oregon. Just I feel like it would happen eventually, but you know what? Whatever. It doesn't really matter. Oregon will beat Ohio State, go on to the national championship game. They've been the best team all season, and I think if they've done it twice, you might as well do it a third time. It's hard to beat a team 3 times if you play them 3 times. However, I think Oregon would be that team to do it. Texas versus Ole Miss. I think Texas will get the win. I don't know if Ole Miss will have enough again to be a top 4 seeded team or top 3 seeded, I guess. But I think Texas will move on to the national championship game. I had them originally Ohio State, Texas. I think in my first one, those 2 would go on. And I think Texas makes it back. So it would be Oregon versus Texas this time. A technical wash between those 2, but everything else a little mixed up. But those 2 teams should make it. They're the top seeded teams. If you don't believe that they make it this far, well, maybe you got a crystal ball or something. Championship game. Oregon versus Texas. I initially had Ohio State versus Texas, but of course I just changed it. So I think I'm going to give the nod to Oregon once again. I have through the couple times I've tried to record this, I've had Oregon winning, but this time I think Oregon really, really gets it done. The Ducks have all the keys right now. I don't know if they'll be back next year, but they have everything right now, and that's all that matters to get them a championship. And this is a perfect year for them to win because nobody is really certain about a lot of these teams, but people are really certain about Oregon. So give me the Ducks to win it all against Texas. I don't really have a final score prediction because I'm terrible at picking scores. With that, I want to thank you for watching the video. Please like, comment, subscribe, share with all your friends. Also, turn on the notification bell so you stay notified for when I upload. So I hopefully will have a couple videos this week. But this is a fun one, as always. I really like to do these predictions. I know I've only done one before, but I've recorded this 2 more times. Thank you for watching. My name has been Tavin Carncross, and I will see you guys later.